Why are faithful professors being purged from an American seminary? And is there another financial scandal brewing at the Vatican? Father Gerald Murray and I will discuss. The Prayerful Posse has arrived. Welcome to the Prayerful Posse. Before I get to Father Jerry, don't forget, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show channel on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube. You don't want to miss an episode of the Posse. Now let's convene the Posse, or part of it. Joining me now, Father Gerald Murray, canon lawyer from the Archdiocese of New York. Father, thank you for being here. Bob, we're sending a search squad out after. We're going to figure out where he is. He's traveling abroad, I'm told. A big story breaking in Detroit. 3 faculty members of St. Mary's Seminary were sacked by the new Archbishop Edward Weisenberger. They included canonist Ed Peters, theologians Eduardo Echevarria, and Ralph Martin, whom, a lot of viewers will know from EWTN. They were all dismissed by the Archdiocese. They've yet to make a statement detailing the reasons for their dismissals, though Ralph Martin did say the following. When I asked him, this is the quote, when I asked him for an explanation, the bishop, he said he didn't think it would be helpful to give any specifics, but mentioned something about having concerns about my theological perspectives. Father, as we know, Weisenberger, the Archbishop who was installed in March, has already made headlines by imposing further restrictions on the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass there. What do you make of these firings? These 3 gentlemen are all declining to comment under advice of counsel.
Well, I can talk about it from the point of view of appreciating these 3 men. I know all 3 of them. I think they're excellent professors. They were doing a great service to the church, and I regret that they will no longer be teaching at that seminary. I hope that they get a job somewhere else. Now, as regards the form, it is really a couple of things bother me a lot. I thought that we were in the age of transparency. So if you fire someone, their work was about to begin, end of August, beginning of September, the seminary reopens. We're at the end of July. They were fired essentially 4 or 5 weeks before they were supposed to continue. No reason given. And when the Archbishop says that he thinks it's better not to do that, I would say, why is it better? If you obviously had a reason for doing it, and to tell us as interested viewers and observers, but then to tell the men directly. Secondly, I know that Professor Echevarria declined to comment, saying that he had a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah,
I thought we got rid of those after the sex abuse scandals,
right?
So why are we doing that? And you just have to say to yourself, what kind of message does this send to the seminarians who are there and to the other faculty members? If you take something as radical as firing 3 professors over the summer and don't issue a statement explaining why, everybody's going to be scratching their head. So it was a bad decision, and it was handled poorly, in my opinion.
Father, these are not green professors that just walked in the door last year. These men have been teaching at this seminary for 20, 30 years in some cases. I mean, and they're deep thinkers. They simply compared. I've had Ralph Martin on the show. He simply was comparing what was proposed during the reign of Pope Francis to the Church's perennial teaching. There's nothing heretical or destructive to the papacy in saying, wait a minute, let's look at how this compares to what the last 2 popes taught before this pope and the Church Fathers.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, this is what people suspect is behind it is a hostility to the theological outlook of these 3 men. And I would say they're professors. We want them to think, and we want them to express themselves publicly. And I know all 3 men, they are not flamethrowers casting aspersions. They are doing exactly what you said, comparing what did Benedict and John Paul II do and teach, what did the Second Vatican Council teach, and what did Pope Francis teach. So the suspicion here is that we got to, there's only one voice allowed, which is affirm everything that Pope Francis said. Otherwise, you can't work in my seminary.
Yeah, well, some of the critics are saying that these men violated the Magisterium of the Pope, meaning the last one, Pope Francis. Austin Ivory said something like that. Your take on that idea that violating the magisterium of the Pope, is there a magisterium of the Pope, or is there the magisterium?
Well, it's the magisterium of the church, and the Pope is the servant and safeguard of that magisterium. His job is to strengthen the brethren in the faith, as our Lord said about St. Peter. So if we're talking about papal magisterium, then what's wrong with comparing what one pope's taught and what another did? You can take a perfect example, capital punishment. Pope Francis said that it's impermissible to use it, and that it's an act of vengeance, and that it's it's an offense to human dignity. Well, no pope has ever said that in the history of the world. The last two didn't say it, even though there was pressure for them to come out against it. Pope John Paul II didn't want it to be administered, but Pope Benedict, before he became pope, wrote a document to the American hierarchy saying, you cannot say that the death penalty is inherently immoral. So, I would just scratch my head to critics who exalt one papal teaching against another and say, unless you're the last man to the post, you don't count. No, all the popes count.
Well, and Father, in the age of synodality, where we're supposed to be listening and conversing around small table groups and airing our differences, so let me get this straight. We can talk about women's ordination, we can talk about breaking marriage bonds and going to communion, but we can't talk about capital punishment? I mean, none of this makes any sense to me. I mean, on the scale of what you'll encounter in your life, I think capital punishment is probably way over there, and it's certainly within bounds of what perennially has been taught within the doctrine of faith in the Catholic Church and from time immemorial. But I got to get to another story, breaking story. From the Pillar this week, a leaked memo from 2016 seems to show that the late Cardinal George Pell, who was head of the Economic Secretariat, he was kind of the economic watchdog appointed by Pope Francis, he attempted to order an investigation into the Vatican office that oversees their real estate holdings and other investments. It's called ABSA, the Administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See. Well, Cardinal Pell seems to have uncovered a scheme where the identity of the true owners or sources of funding of some of these Vatican financial transfers could be protected and shielded. Pell discovered a number of irregular financial transactions that were treated this way, which would indicate major financial malfeasance. Father Pell asked the then Auditor General of the Vatican, Libero Milone, to undertake an immediate investigation into the evidence he found. Milone was summarily sacked, dismissed in 2017. And just days ago, his wrongful dismissal lawsuit was once again dismissed by the Vatican City's court. This looks very bad, Father.
It is bad, and this is one of the tasks that Pope Leo is going to have to take up, because not only does this look bad, European regulators, of course, are involved because the Vatican participates in the banking system, which is regulated outside of Vatican City. And they had a period, you remember, a few years ago, where all the credit cards and debit cards were canceled because they had violated different rules and regulations that the money veil, as it's called, had imposed on them. They got the thing back in order, but apparently this memo reveals that there were, even though they said they were going to do proper things, that they didn't, that they did other things. Now, you have to get it under control also because the credibility of the Holy See, if they assure a regulatory agency of the European Union that everything is in order and they're not involved in money laundering, and then significant evidence arises that that wasn't true, you can't sit back and say, well, let's see what happens. You better tackle this head on. And I think Pope Leo's very well advised to say, look, we got to get somebody in there with full authority to investigate everything. No one can hide anything. And then we're going to tell the results, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to reestablish our credibility.
And Father, you remember Cardinal Angelo Becciu, who was a substituto at the Secretary of State. He authorized classified payments, that's what he called them, classified, payments from the Vatican to a company in Australia between 2016 and 2017. Now, Becciu maintained those classified payments had nothing to do with Cardinal Pell's trial. He was being tried over false, they would proved to be false accusations of sex abuse. That trial was underway at the time of those transfers. What does that tell you about the finances of the Vatican? And is the public due a full accounting of what happened there and how this structure is currently maintained?
Well, at the risk of being, just a historian, remember Watergate started with a piece of tape over a lock in a door at the hotel. In other words, telltale evidence led all the way to Richard Nixon and the cover-up. So the Vatican can't just go with the assurances of Becciu is a convict now. He was convicted. He's not in jail because he's appealed the sentence and he's not being jailed until that appeal is heard. But Becciu's already been convicted by a Vatican court. So how much can we trust what he said? All the reasons why money was sent to Australia, why Cardinal Pell was on trial, that has to be revealed. This memo now that's been revealed, did anybody mess around with codes so that they could hide payments? Reading about this today, I found out, this is the excellent reporting at the Pillar, that the Vatican had cleaned up their act because they had a lot of accounts and nobody really knew who the account holders were. Right. And this is the great temptation that people can say, well, the Vatican has its own bank and investment house. Maybe we could slip some, money in there and then take it out. Nobody knows what it was. This all has to be cleared up. This is making us look like a laughingstock. Cardinals getting convicted, auditors being fired. The auditors then can't get a just trial and hearing in the Vatican. They dismiss them on technical grounds. The grounds why his appeal was dismissed is say, well, you're suing the Secretary of State, but they're not the responsible party. But wait a minute. It doesn't matter what you say. The Pope can simply say, accept the case. I designate them the responsible party. Looking back historically, they were the ones calling the shots. I agree with that. Get this thing over with. I mean, Libero Maloney was a very trusted management consultant and financial guy. He took the job because Pope Francis asked him to do it, and then he got treated essentially like an unwelcome guest who was thrown out the door, and the guy who threw him out then gets convicted.
Yeah, well, and that Cardinal Becciu was ticked off because he claimed Maloney was spying on him. Yeah, that's what investigators do. They look into your fact pattern. No, look, you see why Pope Francis called off the Price Waterhouse audit. Imagine what would have happened had they come into the Vatican. Maybe we'd have some more transparency, though, Father. Look, this week, on a happier note, or maybe not, hundreds of digital missionaries gathered for the first ever Jubilee for digital missionaries and influencers. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, addressed the audience with an appeal to be, quote, connected to hope, saying you are not only content creators, you are witnesses. You are not just building platforms, you're building bridges. Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga was on hand to give an over-the-top blessing, as was Pope Francis' acolyte, Father Antonio Spadaro, the ghostwriter. Father, the attendance was not great, I'm told, and the New York Post covered this event this way. This was their headline: Vatican to host hot priest influencers to spread word of God to younger faithful as numbers slump. I got to say, your first thoughts. I was very uncomfortable when I saw this emphasis on these priests who seem to be into a lot of self-care, gyms and waxing. And what did this achieve, if anything?
Well, influencers usually are in it for the money and the publicity. And, that's an aspect that needs to be looked at. Yeah. Secondly, influencers are self-declared as such, and then they get their audience. These are kind of people that we're counting on to promote the faith, doctrinal knowledge, the experience of biblical literature understood properly. I mean, it would be much better if they called in people who are actually engaged in promoting the apostle of the church through the media in ways that are visible and measurable and good. Because we have a tremendous, in the English-speaking world certainly, and I monitor the Spanish and Italian world, you have wonderful resources, websites, and all the rest talk about this podcast, talk about EWTN. There's a lot going on that's good. So a guy who posts videos of him, walking his cat or buying cappuccinos, come on, that's funny, but are we into trivia and Me Tooism? Since everybody likes influencers, we got to have them too in the Catholic Church. Please, I think we got to get more serious.
Yeah, the deadlift is not a big draw for people looking for spiritual answers, But I have to play this. I wasn't going to, but I am. This is Cardinal Maradiaga. This is kind of his little sing-along. This was posted by Austin Ivory. Watch. They're really dragging out the Francis Brigade here. Maradiaga and Spadaro, Francis biographer Austin Ivory, he was invited. Is this a winning strategy?
Definitely not. I mean, this is the make-believe world that if we have people smiling and cheering, then the faith is being promoted. You know where the faith's being promoted? People going to Mass, kneeling down, people going to confession, saying the rosary. You want influencers? Go to the pilgrimage that took place at Chartres. They had a beautiful one in Covadonga in Spain. They have pilgrimages like this even in the United States. Go to Cardinal Burke's shrine. You want to see people of real influence? It's the people kneeling in front of the tabernacle praying for the church. And how about moms with big families who take their kids on pilgrimages and teach their little 3-year-olds to make the sign of the cross? I'm encouraged when I see ordinary people doing ordinary Catholic practices. Instead of this nonsense of people, let's have a mob, let's have everyone hold up their phone, turn on the lights, wave your hands and say, we love Jesus and all. Great. We all should love Jesus. But is mass rallies and kind of like self-congratulatory back and forth, that's not how you promote the faith. No, you don't have to be in the selfie video as you say you love Jesus. I don't know what that really accomplishes, but is a mosh pit really the appropriate place to say religion is good? Come on. The mosh pit and waxing your eyebrows. This is not the answer. This is not the path to salvation. There was one thing I have to say. The Holy Father met with a youth jubilee the other night, and he drove all down the Via Conciliazione. He had a beautiful message to them in multiple languages.
Jesus tells us, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Look, I'm all for young people getting excited. That's wonderful. I'm glad they're there. And it's great that the Holy Father goes out and meets them. And that, there wasn't the triviality of that other Jubilee in that, youth meeting the other day, which I kind of liked. It was beautiful seeing it. And we have a few images of that there. Father Jerry, I want to move to matters closer to home. The Trump administration announced this week that federal employees may discuss and promote their religious beliefs in the workplace, citing religious freedoms protected by the U.S. Constitution. Now, the new statement cites President Trump's executive order calling for agencies to eliminate the, quote, anti-Christian weaponization of government. He says federal employees may seek to persuade others of the correctness of their own religious views. That, according to the director of the Office of Personnel Management, Scott Cooper. Now, he went on to say supervisors can recruit employees to their religion. In other words, they can proselytize in the government workplace, as long as those efforts are not, quote, harassing in nature. Father, your reaction to this? Critics are already saying this violates the alleged separation of church and state.
No, well, that's nonsense. In other words, the only speech that in the lunchroom, the only thing you can't talk about is God in the church, or if you're Jewish about the synagogue or the temple, or if you're Muslim about the imam. Come on. If you want to talk about what you believe in, I mean, every time the President of the United States, going back years, ends all his speeches, God bless America. Well, can we discuss that, at the Office of Management and Budget, lunchroom? Of course we can. Now, the harassment, of course, comes where you have people saying, you cannot wear a cross, you can't have visible religious symbols, you can't have your Bible on your desk, you can't engage in prayer together. This is nonsense. We have a congressional prayer breakfast every year in Washington. You know that. I'm sure you've been to them.
Yes, I have.
What's going on? The President of the United States is leading the senators and everybody else in prayer. Why can't that happen at the lower levels of federal government? I'm glad President Trump did this.
Yeah. Did you see where the bishops continue to wade into immigration policy and politics? Last week, a group of Los Angeles business leaders joined Archbishop Jose Gomez in L.A. to announce a new fund they've started. Now, this fund will help families affected by recent immigration raids. According to Archbishop Gomez, the program will provide direct support to families who are suffering financial hardships because of the current climate of uncertainty and fear, end quote. Father, your reaction?
They can do that. I mean, charitable action is fine, but
I agree.
What about the crime victims of people killed by illegal aliens? Is there a fund for them? What about workers displaced because illegal aliens are being hired in factories? Is there a fund for them? Taking a one-sided approach, which says any government action to remove people who are legally in the country is inherently unfair, discriminatory, and detrimental, it isn't. And I've said on this program before, everyone who comes in here illegally knows they run the risk of this happening. And if they're serious people, they'll prepare for when that eventuality happens. Don't go to the government and say, I know I broke the law in coming in here illegally, but you have no right to remove me. Of course you have a right to remove. What country is it that announces everybody who wants to come in, please do, and we're never going to remove you because guess what? That's the meaning of charity. That's not the meaning of charity.
Yeah, well, I think it's the church's prerogative, indeed her obligation, to help people in need, and it should reach all Catholics in the pews, including setting up a parallel fund for those angel families, as you mentioned, who lost loved ones who were killed or terrorized by illegal aliens. I mean, that is a reality. Those are American citizens who are here all the time, not just people who just arrived. God bless them. But this is an odd. Yeah, it's an odd choice on their part. On another tragic note, Vatican Secretary of State Parolin and Pope Leo himself both condemned the Islamic attack on a Catholic church in Congo. At least 31 members of the Eucharistic Crusade, a prayer movement and an apostolate for children and young people focused on devotion to the Eucharist, they were all slaughtered. The massacre shows the growing threat from the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, in the region. The Islamic group's goal is to establish a global caliphate. Father, again, another horrible attack against Christians in Africa, and it's jihadi in nature.
Yeah, no, it's I didn't really know there were Islamic fanatics in Congo. I thought that was mostly Christians and pagans, but obviously they're there. I know they've been just doing destruction in neighboring Mozambique, so it's a real problem. This is part of the chaos, unfortunately, in the political scene in the Congo, where the government has had rebels in Rwanda and they've been fighting for decades. But, where is the responsible parties in the Islamic leadership in the Gulf nations and all elsewhere, not only talking about that this is wrong, but helping to arm the government of Congo to fight these people? I mean, this is something that should happen. This is crime. This is not an expression of a political or religious point of view. It's using religion as an instrument of criminal murder, and it has to be stopped. And yes, I hope our president, who takes a great interest in trying to have peace in the world and end conflicts, I hope he'll send a message to the leaders of the Congo that they have to protect their people.
Yeah. Particularly this Christian minority who are increasingly under attack there. And it's not only there, it's Southern Sudan, it's in other places, but
Nigeria.
He has gone, Liberia, he's gone to great lengths to help bring peace to Cambodia and other nations in Africa. I hope he extends the glance of the administration to these poor suffering people. Father, we will leave it there. And if you want more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or go to our podcast, wherever you get yours. On behalf of Father Gerald Murray and Robert Royal, who is abroad spreading the posse cheer, until the posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.